Have you ever heard of a place where fear was stronger than faith? Where the silence screamed louder than any cry for help? Because today, I'm going to tell you one of those stories. But first, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon and tell me in the comments, what kind of story moves you the most, justice, love, or those that blend both? Because this one has all of it, and then some. What you're about to hear took place in a forgotten corner of Brazil's dry backlands, in a place called Riacho da Cruz, a land so parched that the women's eyes were even drier from crying in silence for too long. It all began when a different kind of man rode into town on a dark horse, his beard unkempt, his hands burned by the sun, and a past he tried hard to leave behind. His name? Vicente Montero? Word was, he was the son of a migrant, raised tough, and had inherited a piece of land no one else wanted. The villagers only glanced sideways and whispered. In Riacho da Cruz, outsiders were always seen as a threat. But Vicente didn't care about their looks. He just wanted peace, a patch of soil to plant and harvest. And maybe, just maybe, forget the ghosts he carried inside. What Vicente didn't know was that in this cracked land of pain, there ruled a man named Colonel Honorado Braga. A man with smooth words and a rotten soul. He owned 3 ranches, the only church in town, and some say, even the sheriff. But what he really loved was taking what didn't belong to him. The village girls, the orphans, the poor ones, the ones no one dared to protect, and nobody said a word, either out of fear or because their silence came with profit. By the 3rd day, Vicente already sensed something was off. Women looked away. Men kept their heads down. At Mr. Olavo's store, nobody dared mention the colonel's name, until one day he overheard an older woman whisper, Diolinda's daughter went to Braga's ranch. Never came back. They say she ran away. But how? Not even her doll? That stuck with Vicente. The pain buried in that mother's eyes haunted him. It felt like the entire village was mourning a death no one dared to bury. That night, while mending the back fence, Vicente heard something that changed everything. Crying, soft but filled with pain. It came from the bush. He grabbed his flashlight and followed the sound, his heart pounding like a drum. And there, curled under a tangle of tall grass, was a young woman trembling, her dress torn, her face streaked with dry blood and dust. When she saw him, she tried to run, but her legs gave out. Please, don't take me back. Don't let him take me again, she begged, her voice breaking. And right then, the change Riacho da Cruz so desperately needed began. Vicente knelt down, held out his hand, and spoke softly. It's okay. You're safe now. No one's taking you anywhere. She hesitated, but something in his eyes, something steady and kind, made her stop. What's your name? Rosa Ferreira. And that's how Rosa came into his life. Frightened, shattered, but alive. And Vicente realized that what he found in that godforsaken place wasn't land for planting. It was a reason to fight. But what he didn't know yet was how deep this hole really went. And that crossing the curl was like poking a wild beast with a bare hand. Purgantar, ChatGPT. For days, Vicente kept Rosa hidden in a small wooden shed behind the house. He gave her a blanket, clean water, an old dress that belonged to his mother, and silence, the kind of silence that heals, not the kind that wounds. Rosa barely spoke. Every time she heard the sound of hooves on the road, she'd curl up like she was trying to disappear. Vicente cooked meals, washed clothes, and between one task and the next, kept a sharp eye on the road like a watchman. In the village, he acted like nothing was wrong, but deep inside, a plan was already burning, a plan he didn't even fully know yet. But that grew with every tear Rosa shed. It was only on the fifth night that she began to talk, quietly, between sobs and long pauses. Rosa told him everything. She said the colonel was respected in public, but behind the ranch gates, he turned into a monster. It started with kindness, then came the touches, the commands, the punishments. He said if I told anyone, no one would believe me, that I was just another poor girl who owed him obedience. Vigilante listened in silence, but his clenched fists said what his mouth didn't. The next morning, while Rosa slept, he dug a hole behind the shed and built a hiding place. What lay ahead was far too dangerous to count on luck alone. Days later, the colonel's thug showed up. A man named Cassiano, Yellow Teeth, crooked hat, snake eyes. He said he was looking for a runaway maid, and with a twisted grin, asked if Vigilante had seen anything suspicious. Vigilante just smiled back and replied, "All I've got here is weeds, brush, and a busy man. If I see a girl running, I'll let you know." The glance between them was brief but heavy. Vigilante knew this was just the beginning. The hunt had begun. And now he was the wall standing between Rosa and hell. Meanwhile, whispers stirred in the village. Windows shut when he passed by. Some avoided greeting him. Others just stared. Rosa's name began to surface again. They say she's alive, that the new outsider is hiding her, but no one dared confirm it. Vigilante searched for clues, asked carefully, listened to fragments. He learned Rosa wasn't the first, and wouldn't be the last. Bernice, Dalva, the seamstress's daughter, they'd all vanished after working on the colonel's ranch. It was a pattern, and he knew. Either he acted or he'd be just another man who looked the other way. One afternoon, old Mrs. Giralda, a seasoned midwife, pulled Vigilante aside. "You've got courage in your eyes, boy, but be careful. Honorado isn't a man, he's a beast, and he's killed with his own hands those who dared cross him." Vigilante nodded his thanks, but inside, the fire grew stronger. If he's a beast, I've been taming wild animals since I was a boy, he thought. Rosa slowly began to breathe without fear. She started helping around the house, cooking a little, brushing her hair, but her eyes still held deep trauma like a shadow that refused to let go. On a night dimly lit by moonlight, as they sat on the doorstep, Rosa asked, "Are you going to turn me in?" Vigilante turned slowly, touched her hand and said, "Turn you in? You're a person, not a thing. And people deserve protection." It was the first time she smiled. A timid smile, fragile, but real. The next day, when the dust rose on the road again, Vigilante already knew the colonel was coming. And this time, he was coming in person. The sun hadn't even fully risen when the sound of hooves began to echo down the dusty road. Vigilante was already up, hoe in hand, eyes fixed on the gate. The dust still danced in the air when three figures appeared. Colonel Honorado, towering, atop a dun horse, flanked by his two loyal executioners Cassiano and Beto Ferrigem, the latter with a rifle slung over his shoulder. Vigilante didn't flinch. He stood his ground like a fence post rooted deep in the earth. The colonel halted, adjusted his hat, and spoke with a voice sweet as poison. "Good morning, Mr. Vigilante." "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Vigilante answered with the bare minimum. "Depends what you're here for." The colonel gave a fake chuckle, but his eyes swept the property like a hound sniffing for fear. "Word is you're hiding a girl, one of mine. Ran off while still in debt." Vigilante crossed his arms, hoe still tight in hand. "Only thing that passed through here was a bird. Haven't seen any girl, not even a shadow." A dry silence followed. The henchmen shifted in their saddles. The colonel dismounted slowly, as if just out for a stroll. "Mind if I take a look? Just to be sure." Vigilante raised his chin. No warrant, no stepping in. This land has an owner, and that owner is me. The tension was so thick, even the wind held its breath. The colonel smiled, but his eyes burned. You're new around here. You'll learn how things work. The easy way or the hard way. With a sharp whistle, he got back on his horse and left, but not before casting one last glance toward the shed. Vigilante waited until the dust settled, then ran behind the house and opened the trapdoor to the hiding place. Rosa was there, wide-eyed. Was it him? Yeah, but he left for now. Vigilante took her hand, steady. Now we need to act before they come back. Stronger. That night, as the sky was swallowed by clouds and the scent of rain filled the air, Vigilante made the riskiest decision of his life. He went into the village. Door to door, he spoke in hushed tones, eyes always scanning. He found old Arlindo, the shoemaker who'd lost a daughter. Then Donna Giralda, the midwife. Then old Nicosine as a lunatic, but who knew everything. Vigilante listened to stories, wrote down names, connected the dots. What once were only whispers became the draft of a truth. A filthy, painful truth. Begging for justice. That's when he found Sister Zenaide, the elderly nun who ran the village orphanage. When he mentioned Rosa's name, she closed her eyes and made the sign of the cross. She was sent to the ranch with 3 others. All vanished. The colonel pays to silence and threatens to erase. Vigilante wrote every word into a weathered blue notebook. This isn't just for Rosa, it's for all of them. Sister Zenaide grabbed his arm tightly. Then go with faith. You'll need more than courage. On the way back, he found Rosa sitting by the wood stove, slowly stirring cornmeal mush. You look different, she said with a faint smile. Vigilante sat beside her, the notebook firm in his hands, and replied, It's almost time. Time to make some noise. Rosa bit her lower lip, eyes brimming. If you go, will you come back to me? Vigilante rested his forehead against hers and whispered, I'll only come back if it's with the truth and with the others. The night fell heavy over Riacho da Cruz, and Vigilante didn't sleep. He spent the night with notebook in hand, lamp lit, and thoughts wandering far. It was as if every page he wrote summoned a voice that time had tried to silence, the voice of Rosa, of Bernice, of so many others who vanished behind the gates of the ranch. When the rooster crowed for the first time, he was already on his feet. He saddled the horse, tucked the notebook into his pocket, and rode toward the neighboring town. He needed someone who would listen, someone in uniform. But with a sole dot, it took nearly 3 hours of riding through muddy trails and dense woods. By the time he reached the precinct in the larger town, he was covered in dust, but his eyes were blazing. He asked to speak with the chief inspector, a man named Dr. Rinaldo. He showed the notebook, detailed the disappearances, gave names and dates. He shared what he had seen, heard, and suspected. The inspector, a terse man of few words, stayed silent for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he said, Tomorrow, before sunrise, we'll be there. And if it's true, that colonel is going down. Vigilante returned lighter, but still restless. The sun was setting by the time he arrived. Rosa waited for him at the door, heart pounding in her chest. So, she asked, voice shaky. Vigilante dismounted and replied with a breath. Of hope, tomorrow, Rosa. Tomorrow the fear ends. She smiled with her eyes, ran into his arms, and hugged him like she was hugging life itself. That night, for the first time, they didn't sleep on edge. They slept in each other's arms, like 2 survivors who knew the worst was behind them. But the hardest part still lay ahead. On the other side of the village, however, someone was writing a note. A filthy scrap of paper scrawled in a crooked hand. dripping with malice. Joe Vicente Montero knows too much. He's going to spill everything tomorrow. The note was left on Colonel Honorado's desk. He read every word with rage dripping from his eyes. So, the peasant wants to die, he muttered, crushing the paper in his ring-covered fist. He called in his 2 henchmen and ordered, "Tomorrow, before the cops arrive. I want him dead, and the girl back." The hunt was on dot when dawn broke the next day. It wasn't just the sun that lit up the village. It was also 3 police trucks and 5 armed officers rolling down the dirt road. Vicente stood at the gate, shotgun slung over his back, beside Rosa, Donna Geralda, and old Knuckle, who clutched the notebook like it was a Bible. "Today, truth walks with us," Vicente said, looking up at the clear sky. "Today, fear goes behind bars." With the soldiers in front, they marched toward the colonel's estate. The sound of boots and hooves echoed like the herald of a new era. They arrived unannounced, knocked on the gate, and demanded entry. The colonel appeared on the porch with that same slimy grin. "Now, what's all this mess? What do you want on my land?" The inspector answered plainly, "The truth, Mr. Honorado, and if it's here, we'll find it." The colonel tried to play the victim, but when he saw the notebook, the names, the testimonies, the color drained from his face, and the worst was still to come. Because back there, behind the barns and forgotten silos, was the kind of proof no one could deny. The silence on the ranch was so thick even the birds seemed to have gone quiet. As the officers, led by Vicente's unwavering words, approached the back barn, something in the air shifted. A heavy smell of mold, damp straw, and fear soaked into. The floor made the men instinctively hesitate. Vicente pointed firmly with his finger. "It's in there." One of the officers kicked the door open, and for a moment, the world stood still. In the dark corner, chained by the ankle, a young woman trembled without strength. Her eyes searched for light, even in a place where only shadows lived. "My God, she's alive," Rosa whispered from afar, her hands shaking, heart nearly collapsing. The girl was lurds missing from nearly a year. Thin, her ribs visible, hair tangled and matted. She could barely stand. When she saw the officers' uniforms, she began to cry silently, like someone finally allowed to exist again. The chief looked at the colonel with a disgust he could no longer hide. "You're under arrest for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, assault, and abuse of power. Everything you thought you could bury just surfaced." Honorado tried to resist, but his henchmen didn't even raise their weapons. They were taken down instantly, no fight left. People began to gather from nearby, drawn by the echo of courage. But the colonel, arrogant to the bitter end, tried to escape. He ran like a cornered animal, stumbling over his boots, eyes wide with rage and fear. But he didn't get far. Vicente dropped everything and took off after him, fueled by the pain of every woman in the village. When he caught him, not a word was needed. One clean punch to the jaw was enough. The colonel fell face first into the dirt. Vicente stood over him, spat on the ground, and said, "That was for every woman you tried to erase." The crowd, silent, began to gather. Women wept. Men once silent now stood tall. For the first time in years, fear was no longer in their eyes. That night, Riacho de Cruz changed. Candles lit up windows. People stepped out of their homes as if the air had become breathable again. Songs rose in circles. Prayers were whispered in the town square. And Vicente Montero's name spread from mouth to mouth like a living legend. Rosa walked beside him with a glow in her eyes that had never been there before. It wasn't just gratitude, it was rebirth. The village, once held hostage by a single man, was now learning how to embrace itself, how to speak, how to exist. In the days that followed, Other women began to speak. Testimonies poured out like a waterfall after a drought. Hidden letters surfaced. Names once whispered in fear were now spoken aloud. Vicente's home became a refuge. People came from everywhere to listen, to help, to record. Rosa wrote everything down on loose sheets of paper. This is going to be a book, Vicente, so no one forgets. So it never happens again. He smiled, eyes glassy with emotion, always answering the same way. Write it all, even the ugliest parts. Justice begins when the truth is no longer hidden. While the colonel rotted behind the bars of a cell in another town, the village was blooming with its first flowers of freedom. And though the trauma didn't vanish overnight, it was no longer buried in silence. It became story. It became memory. It became a mark of resistance. Vicente wasn't seeking praise. He returned to his hoe, his land, his barn. But everywhere he went, he was met with nods, handshakes, and the kind of look reserved for the man who gave an entire people their breath. Back. Time moved slowly after the colonel's downfall, as if the village needed to relearn how to breathe without fear. Rosa, now stronger, tended the flowers in the backyard while handwriting testimonies from women who traveled from afar to share what they had lived through. Vicente, on the other hand, was building a new barn with his own hands, not for storing tools, but for gathering stories, hosting meetings, and planting seeds of a different future. Donna Giralda organized talking circles. Old Nico taught the boys how to sew, and even the priest, who once only whispered prayers, now preached about justice with the Bible in one hand and truth in the other. Lourdes, the girl they rescued, still didn't speak much. But every morning, she sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and a little notebook on her lap. One day, she looked at Rosa and said, "You saved me, even without knowing my name." Rosa smiled with tearful eyes and replied, "You were the one who gave me strength not to give up." Their bond grew like furrow roots in soil that had once been dry. It was as if the pain they shared had turned into a bridge. And Vicente watched it all with quiet pride, the kind only someone feels when they know they did what needed to be done. In the big city, the name Riacho da Cruz began to circulate in the newspapers. Reporters wanted to visit the village that had brought down a tyrant with words, courage, and evidence. The government sent officials and promised investments. But the people there had learned to be wary of easy promises. Vicente gathered the townsfolk and said, "If they come to help, that's fine. But the ones rebuilding this land will be us." And that's how it went. A group of women turned the colonel's old house into a school. Lindalva, a young woman who learned to read with Rosa, became a teacher. Every afternoon, she taught the children that battles aren't only won with weapons. Vicente and Rosa never talked about marriage. Their bond seemed to go beyond ceremonies. They slept holding hands, shared their meals, their silences, and their dreams. Until one day, Vicente came back from the field holding a sprouted bean in his hand. "Plant it with me?" he asked in that quiet way that said so much. Rosa understood. It was a request for life, not a celebration. They dug a hole together, and there, between roots and promises, they began a new story, one without owners, without shouting, without pain hidden beneath the surface. Some still feared the colonel might return, even from behind bars. Rumors spread that he had allies, that he still held influence. But Vicente no longer lived in that shadow. If he comes back, he'll find a people standing tall, not on their knees. That was the phrase he repeated in the shop, in the fields, at the school. And the most incredible thing? Now people answered with confidence. Because courage is like a seed. It only needs a breath to sprout. And that breath had already become wind. One ordinary afternoon, as children ran through the crops and women harvested herbs in the garden, Vicente stood watching from the porch. Rosa walked over with a dish towel over her shoulder and a peaceful shine in her eyes. "We won, didn't we?" He sighed, feet dirty with mud, soul free from weight. "We win every day, Rosa. When we plant, when we teach, when we refuse to. Stay silent." She wrapped her arms around him from behind and whispered, "Then let's keep on winning, because now we have someone to leave all this to." That night, Rosa walked out of the bedroom holding a note in her hand. The handwriting was shaky, but steady. "My name is Jonah. I was taken at 14, escaped at 19. I want to tell my story." Vigilante read it in silence, eyes tightening with emotion. "Is she coming?" he asked. Rosa nodded softly. "Tomorrow." In recent months, more and more women had sent letters, messages, or came in person. Some brought only memories. Others carried scars. But all came for the same reason. In this village, they were no longer invisible. Vigilante built another room onto the house. He said it was temporary, but Rosa already knew it was permanent. The house had become a refuge, the porch a confessional, and the backyard a space for healing. There were no walls, only welcome, no commands, only listening, no fear, only trust. And that's how the village was being sewn back together, stitch by stitch. Each thread spun with courage. But even in the midst of all this rebuilding, a dark cloud still lingered. The city's chief inspector sent word. The colonel's allies were being investigated. Some had vanished. Others were seen lurking around. Riacho da Cruz. The next morning, as Vigilante opened the gate to fetch water from the stream, he noticed footprints, fresh, heavy, boot marks. 2 tracks coming and going, and one stepped with a twisted heel, just like Cassiano, the colonel's henchman. Vigilante said nothing, but something in him shifted. He started sleeping with the shotgun loaded. Asked Rosa not to walk alone to the garden anymore. Reinforced the lock on the barn. Justice may take its time, but resentment moves fast, he murmured as he sharpened his hoe. That night at dinner, Rosa noticed the tension in his face. "You think they're going to try something?" Vigilante looked away and replied in a threat of a voice, "I think they already are." A chill ran through Rosa, but she didn't let it break her. "Then let them come, because now we're not alone anymore." Just then, there was a knock at the door. A man stood there, low hat, rough beard, wrinkled linen shirt. It was Otacilio, cousin of one of the girls who had escaped years ago. "I came to help, and if I must, I'll die for this cause," he said, eyes gleaming with the look of someone who'd lost everything except courage. Vigilante wasn't the crying kind, but in that moment, he felt tears weigh down his eyes. His fight was no longer lonely. It was a chain, a root, a whole field ready to bloom. The days that followed were tense. Strangers passed through the village. A window was broken. A threatening note was left in the barn. "You'll all pay." But the village answered with strength. They gathered in the square, holding hands, praying out loud. It wasn't just faith. It was resistance. It was a warning. "No one silences anyone here anymore." Rosa kept writing. In the new notebook, there were now drawings by Lourdes, poems by Lindalva, Joanna's testimony, and many others. It had become a living book, a record she said she'd keep for when our daughter grows up. Vigilante looked at her in surprise. "You're?" Rosa simply smiled. No words were needed. He embraced her, eyes wet with awe. And there, wrapped in his arms and the distant sound of cicadas, something unspoken settled in the air. Their story was far from over, but a new chapter had just begun. The news of Rosa's pregnancy spread through the village like a blessed breeze. Women brought herbal teas, embroidered cloths, and advice laced with ancient wisdom. Donna Giralda insisted the baby would be born strong after all, it came from. Two souls who had defied the impossible. Vigilante, though quiet, carried a light in his eyes that hadn't been seen since he first arrived in Riacho da Cruz. And yet, behind the joy, he never let his guard down. He knew that when hope blooms, there will always be those who try to trample it. And the strange footsteps, the shadows along the road, they hadn't stopped. One muggy night, as Vigilante checked the fences, and Rosa wrote another page in the book, a gunshot ripped through the silence. It echoed from the top of the hill. Dogs barked, children cried, and a wave of tension swept the village. Vigilante ran inside, pushed Rosa to the floor, and blew out the oil lamp. His heart pounded, not with fear, but urgency. He grabbed the shotgun, checked the locks, and slipped out the back door like a man who'd lived through this before. Up on the ridge, a figure darted through the brush. A shadow too fast to be a hunter, too slow to be innocent. The next morning, they found the corral broken into. 2 chickens, throats slit. A message written in blood on a plank of wood. The end has not come. The village gathered in the church courtyard. Vigilante told them what he saw. Rosa, her belly now slightly rounded, spoke with a trembling voice. If they want to hurt me, they'll have to go through all of us. The crowd answered with thunderous applause. Even the priest, once hesitant, declared, whoever still shields evil is complicit in it. And here, the age of accomplices is over. Vigilante strengthened the house's defenses, dug a discreet trench out back, cut escape paths through the bush, and set up coded signals with nearby neighbors. Otacilio, cousin of one of the victims, stood guard at night. The women took turns helping Rosa, and Lindalva organized a village watch with the local boys. They won't lay a finger on her, she said, fists clenched. The people weren't just awake, they were alert. That same week, the district judge announced that Colonel Honorado's trial would resume. But there was talk of dismissal due to lack of solid evidence. Rosa trembled when she heard it. After everything we've shown? Vigilante squeezed her hand. They have power, but we have the people. And now we have the truth in print. Rosa's eyes blazed. Then we'll plaster it on every wall if we have to. The notebook became pamphlets. The village copied the pages using an old mimeograph and posted them in shops, churches, and even the markets of neighboring towns. Every woman who'd been to that farm spoke her truth. Out loud, head held high. The stories took on power names, faces, dates. And then, at last, the national press showed up. A reporter from a major newspaper arrived in Riacho da Cruz with a recorder, a camera, and respect. She sat down with Rosa, listened to everything. Then with Lourdes, Jonah, Lindalva. The next day, the headline echoed across the country. Backcountry village topples colonel with courage and words. It was like thunder, and its echo wouldn't fade any time. Soon, the article's impact was immediate. Cars with out-of-town plates began arriving in the village social workers, journalists, curious onlookers, and people who genuinely wanted to help. But among so many faces, there were eyes that watched, more than they looked. Vigilante noticed it on the second day when he found a knife stuck in the fence, a note tied to the handle. Too much fame attracts disaster. He didn't mention it to Rosa. He just stashed the knife in an old chest and started sharpening his own. His instinct told him the storm hadn't passed, just gathered strength. Rosa, even pregnant, didn't slow down. She led women's support circles, organized the transcription of testimonies, and kept writing for the book. And it was during one of these gatherings that Jonah shared something that changed everything. The colonel had a black notebook. He wrote down everything, names of girls, dates, amounts. I saw it once while cleaning his office. Vigilante froze. Do you remember where he kept it? Jonah nodded. In the bottom drawer of the desk, it had a false bottom. That wasn't just evidence, it was a death sentence. That same day, Vigilante rode to the city where the colonel was imprisoned. He requested a meeting with the judge and brought Joanna's signed statement, along with the promise that he could point out exactly where the notebook was. Pressured by national media attention, the judge authorized an immediate search of the estate. Rosa refused to let Vigilante go alone. If this is going to end it all, I want to see it with my own eyes. 4 months pregnant, she mounted her mule with determination. When they arrived accompanied by 2 officers and the journalist, the air felt charged, like a holy war was about to begin. Inside the desk, just as Jonah had said, was the false bottom. And inside it the notebook. Black, thick, filled with tight handwriting and dates. It's like he wrote his own damnation, one of the officers muttered, stunned. There were records of payments to henchmen, dates of deliveries, names of missing girls, even Rose's name, with an amount beside it. When she saw it, she wept. Not for herself, but for every girl on that list. We weren't people to him. We were numbers. But now we're a voice. The notebook was handed over to the prosecution. With those pages, there was no more. Loophole. Conviction was inevitable. The village celebrated with bonfires, accordions, and tears. Vigilante, sitting on the porch log, watched in silence. Rosa sat beside him with a mug of mint tea. Is it over now? She asked. Vigilante shook his head. It's over for him. For us, it's just beginning. That night, for the first time in months, they slept without a lookout. And they dreamed of rain-soaked soil, of a child running through the yard, of a world where a poor girl would never again be easy prey. But fate, at times, tests even those who've walked through fire. In the middle of the night, a scream shattered the calm. It was Lindava. The makeshift school was in flames. Chaos, water buckets, crying children, black smoke rising like a warning from a past that refuses to stay buried. Vigilante ran into the burning building and rescued the notebooks, the records. He emerged with scorched hands, but unwavering eyes. They want to erase what we wrote, but forgetting? That they won't manage. The next morning, the village gathered. We'll rebuild, bigger, better, and this time with bricks and courage. A rebuilding began even before the smoke from the fire had vanished from the sky. Vigilante, his hands wrapped in bandages, mixed clay with his feet while the men raised new walls and the women stitched curtains from colorful scraps. It was as if the school, once born from pain, was now being reborn in hope. Rosa, her belly already showing, gathered the children under a mango tree, telling stories and teaching them letters by tracing her fingers in the sand. It was just a building that burned, she said. The idea, that no one can set on. Fire. Weeks later, the new school was complete, with a name, a plaque, and everything. It was called House of Living Memory, Rosa Ferreira, a tribute not only to the woman who spoke out, but to the symbol she had become. Vigilante tried to protest, but he was overruled. It's not about vanity, they explained. It's to remind us of what this land has endured, so no little girl ever grows up thinking she deserves less. And so, in the same village, where fear once reigned for decades, children now read aloud, drew pictures of their families, and learned that courage, too, can be taught. The colonel's final trial happened on a day of clear skies. It was broadcast over the radio, covered in newspapers. The judge read each charge with steady voice. Kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, rape, coercion, abuse of power, bribery. Witnesses spoke with bravery. Rosa was the last to testify. With her round belly and tear-filled eyes, she looked at the shackled defendant and said, "You tried to silence me. You tried to buy me, you tried to erase me, but I survived. And now I'm a mother, and my daughter will grow up in a place where no one can silence the truth. The silence that followed in the courtroom was louder than any applause. Sentenced to over 30 years with no chance of appeal, the colonel left with his head down gone was the proud stance, the arrogant mustache. He was just a defeated man. The village didn't celebrate with a party, but with quiet smiles. Because the truest victories felt in the everyday things, in carefree laughter, in unlocked gates, in casual chats on the porch. Vigilante returned home in silence. Rosa was waiting in the rocking chair. "Is it over?" she asked. He didn't answer. He simply knelt before her belly and whispered, "Now we begin, for real." Months later, beneath the open sky and the scent of rain-soaked earth, their daughter was born. They named her Aurora, a name chosen by all. Aurora, because she came after darkness. Aurora, because she arrived with light. Her baptism was held on the same day the village cooperative opened. The old colonel's warehouse, now renovated, became home to women teaching trades, youth learning music, and a mural of the survivors' portraits. Painted on the wall, in bold letters, were the words, "Here blooms what once was only pain." Vigilante. And Rosa never sought recognition. They stayed simple. He with his hoe, she with her books. But every time they passed through the town square, someone made sure to greet them, not with reverence, but with respect, not with fear, but with gratitude. And every now and then, as the sun set behind the hills, Rosa would sit on the porch and read passages from the book that was slowly taking shape, a record of memories, truths, and rebirths. Vigilante listened with his eyes closed, like a man hearing his own heart beat outside his chest. And so, in Riacho da Cruz, where pain once carved deep wounds, love found room to grow. The past, though never forgotten, became roots. And the future became a flower named Aurora, a village named Courage, a story that will never be erased. Because when people choose to speak, neither fire, nor fear, nor power can silence them again. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that love still resists, that justice can rise from the courage of just one soul, and that no pain, no matter how deep, is greater than the strength of a united community. Now I want to hear from you. Which part of this story moved you the most? Was it Vigilante's arrival, Rosa's desperate escape, the birth of little Aurora, or the moment the entire village stood tall and said, "Enough"? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories, and help this video reach more hearts. Because every time you like, comment, or share, you're also fighting silence and planting a new seed of change. See you in the next one. And never forget, those who have courage rewrite the ending.